Good morning, everybody. I am so excited you're all here. If we haven't yet met, my name is Dominic, and I serve on the staff here at Eastwind with our junior high. So most of my Sundays, I get to spend with the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, but I'm really blessed because today I get to spend all of our time in here with you. So I'm really excited. For those of you who don't know, my dad is Pastor Carlos, the lead pastor here, and he came to me a couple months ago with some really good news. He told me, the whole family, we've all been invited to Santa Barbara. We're going to stay at the pastor's house, drive around in his car, hang out on the beach. It's absolutely beautiful place. But today, as I'm with you guys in here, I realized I was very confused by what he meant by the whole family, because he's enjoying the beach, and I'm in here with you. But truly, I am really excited to be in here because we're continuing where we left off with the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus' teachings on what the good life looks like. And I believe that because Jesus is teaching us how to deal with our treasure today, that it works. It works for me who's 20 years old, and I believe it works for me when I'm 40 and 60 and 80 and if I'm 100, and when I'm single and married and when we have kids and when we're grandparents, because it's what Jesus taught us is the good life. Now, if you're newer to Eastwind, or maybe this is your first time, I do want to welcome you, and I have a little warning. I'm going to throw a question up here on screen, and I'm going to give you a minute to turn to a complete stranger or the person you came here with today, and you're going to answer this question for a minute. If it makes you feel nervous or awkward, just look at the floor. It'll be over in a minute. But the question is, when you were 12, how much money did you think made someone rich? So when you were 12 years old, how much money made someone rich? You guys can finish up your thoughts, whatever you're sharing. When I was 12 years old, I knew all about treasure, because when I was 12 years old, I decided exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was going to be rich. It was the best occupation I could think of. So at 12 years old, I started my first business, which was a car wash. And not only did my first customer let me wash their car and pay me to do it, but she also bought me the brushes and the soap I needed to get the job done. So I was really blessed, and at 12 years old, I was on my fast track to being rich. I already had $30 whole, and I felt rich. And every single month, I got $30 more, and I felt rich. But today, if any of you, no matter how much I like you, came up to me and said, I have a job, it's great, it's $30 a month, you're gonna work for me, I'm not interested, I'm sorry. So something's changed from when I was 12 years old to today. So I have another follow-up question. You can turn to the same person or a different person. But the question is, how much money would you consider rich today? And you don't need, it's a sensitive subject, you don't need to put a dollar amount, but the lifestyle or the trips that would come with that. Share that with your neighbor, and we'll be back in a minute. You guys can finish sharing once again. So I know that this was my experience, and I wouldn't be surprised if we went around the room. It was many of our experiences. But the number for what counts as rich keeps going up, or maybe even the number for what counts as enough keeps going up. And there's so many reasons for that. When I was 12 years old, I didn't have any bills. I just had Legos to buy. And now I have food to buy, and I have gas to pay for, and I have rent. But something else has changed too. And that's my expectation for what counts as enough. And this is a very common experience. In fact, it was so common that in the 1970s, there was a psychologist by the name of Philip Brickham who was studying human happiness. And what he noticed over and over again is that when humans reach this level of happiness, pretty soon this newfound happiness or newfound sadness just ends up becoming, they go back to their baseline. And he called this the hedonic treadmill. And it's going counterclockwise. It looked a little funky when I first looked at it. But we start with desire, right? Lots of us have desires in this room, whether it's a desire for a new car or a raise or maybe even a full promotion. And then because we have this desire, what Philip discovered, well, he didn't discover this. We all know this. We often strive for those desires. And sometimes when we do really, really well, we obtain the thing we're striving for. I know there's been plenty of times where I've set a financial goal or a goal with my job, and I've reached it later. And then the best part comes, we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. But what he discovered was that next, for some reason, over and over again, we adapt and desire more. We're in this never-ending cycle where we'll have enough as soon as we have just a little bit more, which is tough because we can never get there. So please, if you brought your Bible today, we're going to open up to Matthew 6:19, and you can grab one from the seats in front of you as well. But Jesus begins this part of his message with this. He says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, and thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So 2,000 years before, Jesus, who was not necessarily what we would call a psychologist, came up with a similar but different idea, which is that our treasure is really, really vulnerable. The treasure we store up here on earth is vulnerable. All of it. It can be lost. And I have a little slide here with a blank, but you guys can just think to yourself. You can insert anything into this blank, but if it's an earthly treasure, there's a really high chance it can be lost, whether it's a car in an accident or your down payment on your next house when there's unexpected medical bills, or even where you're at in your career. It can all be lost. But also, Philip brought up another idea, which was that it can also be lost when it no longer counts as enough. Your treasure that once was enough is now no longer enough. Now you've lost it. And I really realized this for myself a couple years ago when my grandfather passed away. And it was, of course, a really sad time, but there's also something special about when the family gets together and they haven't seen each other in a while, and we all gathered at their farm in Connecticut. And my grandma and grandpa have this beautiful farm. It's hundreds of years old, and it's on like 100 acres. And it's something I would personally consider treasure. But what I noticed wasn't how beautiful their farm was. It was that while we were sitting around celebrating the life of my grandpa, not a single person turned to another person and said, "Wow, he's such a good guy. Like, look at all this land he's on." Or, "Wow, we really know the fruits of his life because look at all this stuff he had." Because in that moment, we all understood that the treasure didn't matter. Because if it wasn't lost during his life, it sure was at the end of it when he didn't have access to it anymore. None of his earthly treasures mattered in that moment. Now, I've been using this word treasure, but we haven't really put a definition on it. So if you do have your Bible, we're going to continue to Matthew 6:22, where Jesus continues with, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" And I don't think Jesus was acting as a first century optometrist checking out people's eyes. I think he was addressing focus issues. Because just like how a lamp fills a room with light, our eyes often fill our body with the focus for that thing. Or an even easier example for me to understand is kind of like bikes. If you don't know how to ride a bike, I'm going to teach you most of it right now. You look where you want to end up. And I'm a big mountain biker, and I actually proved this for myself a couple of years ago, biking with some friends in California. Whoa!
Hey, stay with.
Yeah, thank goodness I had a really good friend. But when I look at the floor, I end up on the floor. And if I had looked at the trail ahead of me, I would have seen the jump coming. I hopefully would have acted differently. Don't worry, I'm better now. That was many years ago. But where we focus, we often find our treasure. But the good news that comes with that is that if the place I'm focusing is often the thing I'm treasuring, then if I want to understand what my treasure is, I have to find out what I'm focusing on. And this question isn't perfect, but the place I start is with this. What's the first thing you focus on when you get up in the morning? Now, I'm a big morning person, so my day always starts first thing when I wake up. And at different times in my life, it was going to the gym. I wish that was still the case. And there was other times in my life where it was checking my Bitcoin, which was never doing well, so horrible start to the day. And there was other times where it was seeing if any of my potential clients for my job had texted me back. But by asking myself this question, I was able to see what I was treasuring. And in those different seasons, it looks like different things, but I was always focusing and treasuring something. But Jesus is offering us an alternative. It's to treasure him and to build our lives around him. So my next question was, why can't we just do both? Why can't I focus on this thing and give it my all, like my career or saving up for something, and then also treasure Jesus at the same time? And Jesus continues in Matthew 6:24, where he says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Or the way I put this was, you can't give two things your everything. And it kind of starts to make sense when we think about it, because if there's two paths, which are the king and his kingdom and storing up earthly treasures, if I give my everything to the king and his kingdom, then I don't focus on storing up earthly treasures the same way, because Jesus himself commanded me not to. And if I'm giving my everything to storing up earthly treasures, then I know I also can't be giving my everything to the king and his kingdom, because the king and his kingdom said, do not store up earthly treasures. We can't give our two things to everything. And that applies to everything. We're not just talking about money. We're also not just talking about our jobs. Once again, the thing we focus on is often where we find our treasure. So if I'm giving something all of my focus, then that focus isn't going somewhere else. And if Jesus is calling out to me and commanding me to build my life around him and treasure him, I want to move in that direction. So these are the three questions I asked myself to understand where I was at today with those things. The first thing is, what do I strive for? If the thing I focus on is my treasure, then I'm probably focusing on the thing I'm striving for. And if that thing doesn't line up with the king and his kingdom, and if it's not submitted to him, I know that I'm not serving two masters. I'm choosing the thing I'm striving for. Or maybe even a bigger one is, what do I save up for? If I open up my budget and my spreadsheet at the end of the month, and I look at every dollar and where it was allocated, and every dollar was towards my savings or my spendings, and there was no generosity, then I'm not serving both God and money. I clearly let money win the last round. And where do I focus? If my career is my focus, even working at a church, guys, and I have no time left to fellowship with my community or to spend time growing closer to Jesus, then I'm not serving both God and my career. I've clearly picked my career for this season. And I know I want my answers to these three questions to line up for what God has in store for me. Now, if you haven't noticed by now, I'm not Carlos, so my message is actually about to come to an end. We have a short one today, but I'd like to leave you with this, and we're going to spend a minute with this up on screen. We're not going to turn to our neighbors or anything, and then Leif is going to join us up here for communion. But my final question for you is this. Today, if Jesus was our treasure, how would we spend our time, our money, and our freedom? Would it look the same as it does right now, or is there just some work to be done? Because the good life that Jesus spoke about in the Sermon on the Mount is the life I want for myself. And it starts by submitting my treasures to the King and his kingdom. So thank you, everybody.